All right, we're back. We are COMP253, that is assets for game developers. In the fall 2018 semester at Centennial, we are week 1, so lesson 1, part 2 of our broadcast. I think I fixed it now. Unity UI intro, part 1. We'll do part 2 next week. All right, so let's bring up Unity. I've got Unity running right now, and when you first start with Unity, it doesn't look like this. The default layout in Unity, if you go to default, looks like this. Yeah? So why do I turn the layout to something else? Now, this is Unity Personal Edition. Let's start talking about naming first before I move it around. 1, I have this thing called the hierarchy in Unity. And the hierarchy is where you're going to put all your game objects, right? So game objects kind of float in the hierarchy. Notice that the first game object we have here, because we're in 2D mode, is the main camera. And the main camera is basically what the user sees. So the space of what the user sees. So when I click on an object in the hierarchy, on the right-hand side in Unity, you notice that there's an inspector. The inspector itself tells us details or properties about the camera. So camera is here, inspector here. That's pretty far for me to move my mouse. Like, I don't want to keep going click, click, and then over here, modify, click, click, and then over. So that's why I don't like this view, number 1. Second thing is the assets are way down here, like on the bottom of the screen, which is very Maya-like. I think they kind of put it down here because Maya does a lot of their assets on the bottom by default. I don't like this layout particularly for a couple of reasons. One of it is that the screen is really small, and I have a large area for assets and hierarchy. I want to see a bigger screen, and I'm also broadcasting, so I don't do it this way. So I recommend going from a default view to a 2x3 view. All right. Now there's other views too you can go to. Now this is the default 2x3 view, but let's create my view together. Okay. So the way to do this is, notice I've got my hierarchy here and my project over here. You can tear these tabs off. So I take my project and I can drag and drop it. Excuse me, drag and drop it underneath this one. So I can go, hip, there's my project. That's the first thing I do. So there's my project tab, right? Now it's inside my hierarchy tab. So now you can see that I have way more room, and if I can crush it like way over here, right? If I want to. That's number 1. The second thing is that I don't need my assets to be this big folder like this. Notice on the bottom there's this little slider on the bottom, right? You can actually slide it to make it bigger or a list, and I prefer a list overall because I don't need to see a big thing. So here's scenes by default. The new Unity gives you sample scene, so you should see sample scene or something like that. If you don't, and if you don't see a scene at all, you can make it your own scenes folder. Let's do that. So let's suppose that I have nothing in my assets folder. So I'm going to click on assets. I'm going to go to scenes and delete the scenes folder just by going delete. So right click and delete. All right, so now I have absolutely nothing in assets. My assets is completely empty, right? Now I'm going to make a new folder. So I'm going to right click in here, in this area, and make a new folder, create folder on the top. I'm going to call this assets, but with an underscore. So underscore assets. Sorry, underscore scenes. I'll be okay. Woohoo. There we go. So the reason why I'm using an underscore is because it'll appear at the top of your assets if I add other things. And I want 2 things to appear at the top of my assets as a default. One of them is scenes, where I'm going to have all my scenes, like the main menu scene or the play scene or whatever. And the other one is scripts. If I want to write any scripts in Unity, then I want that to be at the top too. So I'm going to kind of click down here, right click. I'm going to say create new folder, and it's going to be underscore scripts with a capital S. We got 2 of those things right there. So scripts and scenes. Yay. Inside my hierarchy, I still have my main camera, but there is no scene. And if I press File, Save Scene, it's going to ask me where do I want it. It's going to pull up a little dialog box that tells me, hey, where do I want to put my scene? I want to put it in, of course, the scenes folder, the underscore scenes folder. And I want to name this scene main, okay? So this is kind of our main scene. We're also going to have a menu scene in a second. So here's our main scene. Notice that now the top says moves from unknown on the top here to main. I know it's kind of hard to see for where you guys are. But instead of unknown, it says main. What I'm going to do just to make you guys see this better is I'm going to change my settings on my display settings here. I'm going to move from 100%, which is where it is right now, to about maybe 125. Let's see how that works. For some people, this is a really annoying thing, but do you see that a little better? Yeah. Okay. The other thing that I want to change is this. this thing here. So notice that there's my scene window and there's my game window. What you can do is you can pull your game window tab next to your scene window like this. So now you have a lot of room for your scene. You can see your scene nicely, right? There's also some other basic windows I always like to look at. I like to look at the console window because it gives me feedback if there's any problems with my game. So if you go to get other windows, if you go to the window menu, and if you go to General, on the right, there is Console, which you can also get to with Control-Shift-C. By the way, all the shortcuts are right here to open up these different windows. I want to get the console, though. Here it is. And I want to pull this console in there as well. So next to the game. So I've got Scene, Game, Console right now. Okay. All right, so those are our tabs. In the Scene window, this is where we're actually going to drag and drop stuff from the hierarchy so we can see stuff in here in the scene. All right. The game is what we actually have a preview of what our final game is going to look like. Okay, that's where the game scene is. So the scene is where we work. The game is another viewport, and it's going to look and see what the game actually looks like right here. Okay, console is where we can get some feedback, and you can have other tabs appear as well. Okay, navigation. Whenever we want to move things in the scene, so let's add a couple of simple things to the scene. So I'm going to right-click in my hierarchy. I'm going to add a new game object. So just an orientation, a quick orientation of Unity. Notice that if I go to 3D, there's 3D objects and 2D objects that I can add, right? If I right-click. By the way, you can also get these things by going to the little create down menu here. And I can also do it this way. I can say 3D object cube or 2D object sprite, right? For now, let's use a 3D object, but we'll only see it in 2D. Okay, so I'm going to go 3D object cube. And notice that the cube physically appears in the scene as a square, right? Here's the main camera. Here's the cube. And if you look at the preview now on the game tab, you see this black object like this, right? It looks like a square. But actually, if you go back to the scene, and if you uncheck 2D, right? If you uncheck 2D, it shows you this. This is what it really looks like in a 3D scene, okay? There's the cube, but the cube is black because this is 3D. And the reason why the cube is black is because there's no lights. In order for us to make this cube look white, we need to add a lighting to the scene if we want to. So for now, we're not going to need to do this normally, but for now, we're going to right-click and we're going to say, I want to add a light. So like if you look down here where it says light, let's just add a directional light. And now the cube is white. Why is the cube white? Again, if I go back to 3D, you can see that there is a three-dimensional light. I'm going to tumble around here for a second. That starting in this direction, right here's my light source. And the light source is kind of from one direction, and it's high, kind of shining on one part of my cube right now. The rest of the cube seems dark. But if I go back to my 2D version, like by clicking this button, I'm back to this scene. And you can see that the light, even though it's here, it's outside the scene because all we see is what's inside this square right here. But if you see this square, that's all we see. My directional light is also inside my main camera, which is not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. Oh, let's talk about game object for a second. When you make a game object, you can put a game object inside of another game object, inside of another game object. Think about each of these game objects that are listed in the hierarchy as containers. Every game object is pretty much the same as every other game object because Unity uses something called a component system, right? In fact, it's really called the entity component model, right? So what you have is components that make up each of the game objects. So if you look at your cube as a good example that we just added, the cube has two things. It has a transform, and the transform has rotation, position, and scale. So it allows you to move the object or rotate the object in your coordinate space, right? That's what it does. Or I can scale the object up or down. Right? That's what the cube is, right? That's the first transform. But also notice that the transform exists in the main. There's a transform, as well as the directional light. There's a transform. So the transform component, because this is part of every game object by default. In fact, if I had an empty game object, so if I go back to here and I right-click and I go create empty, and let's just call this empty game object my player. So I'm going to call this empty game object player. you can see that the player only has one component, and it is a transform. On the right of the player, if you have some funny numbers like this, on the right of the player, there's a little gear. If you, this little gear itself, if you pull it down, you can click the reset button on the gear, the reset menu option, right? I went to the gear and the reset menu. And if I click that, it resets to 000, the game origin, which is in the middle of the screen here. Again, if you want to see that, you can see that my player object, and these are this is the manipulator or the gizmo, if you will, right? And there's 3 arms. Whenever we do anything in 3D graphics, which we're going to learn this semester, there's always going to be 3 arms you're going to see. There's going to be the green arm, the red arm, and the blue arm. The green arm represents movement in the y-axis. The red arm represents movement in the x-axis, and the blue arm represents movement in the z-axis. So notice the green arm, the red arm, and the blue arm, the configuration. And this thing for Unity, Y is up. That's the position of Y. X is to the right. Okay, so if I go back to 2D, you can see that. If I go closer, and I'll tell you how I'm getting closer in a second. I'm going to move my camera away, or my cube away. Here's my cube. And if you click these buttons on the top, the way the hotkeys for the buttons are Q for the hand, W for the manipulator, right? E for rotation, R for scaling, right? T for the rectangle tool, and Y for move, rotate, and scale, and kind of in a combination, right? So that's what these things are. So really, it's the QWERTY keyboard. The Q, W, E, R, T is these buttons on the top. So Q, I press Q for my cube. I can kind of move my screen around. Press W for my cube. I can actually use the manipulator arm to move it up and down. If I just click on one side, so the green arm, if I click it and drag, I can move my cube up and down. If I click the red arm here, I can move my cube right and left. And if I click the middle, I can kind of move it anywhere I want. Okay? And notice the only thing I'm affecting, if you look at the properties or the inspector on the right side over here in this window, when I move my cube around, take a look over here. So if in the Y direction, then these values change, like these values here. See how these values are changing? But notice that their values aren't changing very much. In fact, the value is like 1.1. What the heck does that mean, 1.1? 1.1 units. What are the units we're using? By default, Unity uses meters. Okay, so 1.1 meters above the origin, that's where this is right now. And if I go down, if I go below the camera over here, you can see that it's negative 1.5, right? Because I moved below the origin 1.5 units, if you will. If I go to the right, you can see now that the x-axis has changed 1.7 meters or 1.7 units to the right. And if I go to the left, it's a negative 1.8 to the left of the origin, where the camera's in the origin. Okay, so that's kind of movement and manipulation of objects. I've added a few objects here inside the hierarchy, and I can move them around. Okay, so very simple. I've got other components in the cube. The cube has a mesh filter. It also has a mesh renderer and a box collider. All right, box collider is used to collide one object to the other. And I can get rid of that. Let's just get rid of that. I can get rid of any component by going into the gear and click Remove Component. And the same thing with, if I take away the mesh renderer, you won't see anything. The cube will disappear because renderer means draw. So if I want to draw the cube, I need a renderer in Unity. So again, we have different components. A transform, which allows me to move a container object around anywhere I want in the game world, right? And then I have the renderer that actually draws that component. Okay, if I don't have the renderer, it doesn't draw anything. So this entity component model, where I have a container and I can add components to it, is very flexible. Because that means I can add as many components to my game objects as I want. For example, I want to make a networked component. I want to have a networked multiplayer game, right? Well, I can add a networking component to the object, and suddenly it will appear in everybody's screen on the game. You know, it's like I can create a network ID. Unity makes it so easy to do that by adding as many components as I want, right? If I want to make it collide or have the ability for you to detect collision between one object and the other, or have physics work on the object, I can do that by adding a component. It's that simple. I almost sound like, Steve Jobs. It's that simple, right? That's what you always used to say. But yeah, that's how it is. It's like, it's not a difficult system at all. So Unity is the reason why it's made simple is because it's a game maker of a kind, right? All right, so we have this component, this cube, but it's not really 2D. It's really 3D, like I showed you, right? I can go into 3D and I can see a 3D model in here. How do I pan? If I go back, so I've unclicked 2D, how do I pan and tumble and all that kind of stuff? So my left mouse button, what it does is, if I'm in this mode here, where I have my arrow, right? If I left click on an object, I can select it in Unity, right? However, if I'm within the hand mode, so if I press the Q key, I have a hand now. What that can do is drag my scene across anywhere I want, whether it's in 3D or if I click the 2D button in 2D, I can actually move my whole scene around like this. I can kind of grab it and move it around. If I zoom in and out, I can do with my middle mouse wheel. So if I zoom in and out, I can move in with my middle mouse wheel. That's the way I can do that as well. Zoom in and out. Also, if I'm trying to make sure that this is correct here, that I'm going to tell you. You can also press the Alt key and the right mouse button. Alt and right mouse button will also zoom in and out. Okay, Alt and right mouse button. Okay, and that just kind of zooms the camera. It actually moves the viewport camera closer and farther away. That's what it does. It doesn't affect your scene, so it doesn't affect the game itself. It's just what you see in the scene mode. Anything you do in the scene mode, right? Maybe you're moving objects around in the scene, your cube or your directional light or your player or whatever. That's just in the scene mode, right? But what you see in the game mode is the most important piece. This is the preview of what you're going to see in your final game. Okay? Notice that the cube that we put in is kind of off center on the top left, and so too does it show that in the scene. We can see the cube because it's within the camera's viewpoint, if you will. The camera is an orthographic camera. It doesn't use, so there's different kinds of cameras. So right, if you notice, right now we see an orthographic camera for 2D, and we have a certain size of the camera. The size is 5 points or 5 units. How do I know this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I count 5 up, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 across. That's what this is, right? You have clipping planes, and this is very interesting what clipping planes are. We have the near plane and the far plane of the camera. I want you to think about the near plane as an invisible plane that's right next to your eyes if you're the camera person, right? So the near plane, as you bring it closer and closer to your eyes, that is the shortest limit that you can start seeing stuff. So 0.3 units as to the camera, right? And the far plane is 1,000 units far, like really deep. So question, we're in an orthographic projection. Do we really care about seeing 1,000 meters deep into the world? Probably not. So we can reduce this a lot. If we go back to, let's say, even 100, you're going to see that there's no difference of what we see here, but whatever is clipped is outside of 100 meters. When I say clipped, it means not drawn. Okay, so the clipping plane, that's why it says clipping plane. Anything before 0.3 meters, that's the near plane. And the far plane is anything beyond 100 meters away or 100 units away from the camera's view. And if I go back into 2D, into 3D, this is what it looks like. Take a look at the camera now, what it can see. The camera is a big rectangle like this. Take a look, guys. Here's a big rectangle, right? And if I change this value, let's say if I change the far plane, and if I bring it closer, you can see that now the camera is going to see less and less and less and less, right? As far, right? And I can even bring it closer because I don't care how much the camera sees deep because I'm in a 2D game. Unless I want layers in my 2D game, which we're going to get to, right? If I want different layers, one that appears farther, one that appears closer, I can do that. So right now I'm at 0.3 and 20.3. So let's make this an even 20. All right, notice how it affects the camera. So I'm going to kind of go in here and move in. If I right-click on the mouse without pressing the Alt key, I actually do something called tumble or orbit, if you will. So I can left-click and move things around, and then I can tumble or orbit with my right mouse button, okay? There we go. So I'm going to kind of go in there, and you can see that there's a 3D box. If I go back to 2D though, you can see that it transforms. Take a look. If I go 3D, and then 2D, and then 3D, and then 2D, all it does is project things differently. So this is an orthographic projection. Okay, cool. So again, I'm looking at like 0.3 for the near plane and 20 for the far plane. A bit better performance here than 1,000. Okay, 1,000 means that I'm going to see everything for 1,000 units. I don't need to see everything for that. There's nothing there to see. And even if I was to make a 3D scene or a 2D scene, chances are 1,000 would be really, really far. Okay, so I've modified the camera, and I modified that in the inspector. So recap, we have some buttons for motion, moving things around. I have my scene view, I have my game view, I have my console view, I have my hierarchy here, I have my project information over here. I don't have anything in here except for a scene right now. That's all I have, the main scene. Okay, and then I have my inspector that is context sensitive. Anything I click inside the main hierarchy, or as well as any assets that I have in here, I will see some kind of properties in the inspector potentially. All right, so if I click the player, you can see that the player only has a transform. If I click the cube has some other components. And if I click the main camera has 3 components actually. It has a transform, it has the camera component, and it has something called an audio listener, which we're going to get to in this course. An audio listener actually allows us to hear sounds, and it's being heard at the camera, which is very interesting. Okay. You can also have 3D sounds, so you can have audio listeners throughout your scene. So as you move closer to a 3D sound, it emits sound. A sound gets we can hear a sound from a particular audio listener, and we can attach an audio listener to any component. All right, so we have a cube. Let's go back to the scene for a second. And I want to delete stuff from here. I can right-click and delete the cube. I can just press delete. I can also hit an object and press the delete key, right? So that gets rid of it. And let's delete my directional light too. So I got nothing in the scene anymore. Notice for the directional light, it didn't really change the game. The directional light was literally there for us to see something in the scene. Now, because we're in the 2D assets part of our course, I want to kind of bring in some simple things that I want to put in. I want to bring in a sprite, and I want to make a sprite in any tool you feel like you want to make it. And I want to make the sprite a square. Yay, it's a really exciting sprite right now. Okay, don't worry about how exciting it is. You can make it a square, you can make it a triangle, you can make it whatever you want. You can draw with your mouse, but I want to bring that sprite into Unity. How do I do that? Well, first, let's make it. So I'm going to use my very simple program, Fireworks. It's an Adobe program. Again, I'll be using Krita and other times as well. And I'm just going to make a new, you can use Paint if you want, whatever you want here. Doesn't matter, whatever you want to use. And I'm going to make this object something like, I don't know, 100 pixels by 100 pixels. This is something we have to talk about, because pixels and units are 2 different things. Okay, so here's pixels, and let's make this 150 pixels per inch, something like that. And the background is going to be transparent. It's going to be a sprite. And I'm going to press OK. So you can see I've got a transparent sprite about a square, about 100 by 100. And I'm going to just draw a very simple shape inside there. Maybe what I'll do is I'll make something that is a polygon like this. So I'll kind of draw a polygon. Let's try and do this. So make it draw maybe some kind of hexagon shape. And we'll do one of these. There's my hexagon, or my pentagon. That's what it is right now. And you can draw whatever shape you want. And I want to rotate this pentagon. Again, we talked about what the difference is between being an artist and a technical artist. Here, I'm using a tool to do the artwork for me. Hence, technical artist. All right. I can rotate this thing around, right, as an example. And let's just rotate it again. That's kind of off. I don't like it. It's kind of skewed. You can also add things with, you can view things like guides and all that kind of stuff here in Fireworks or in Photoshop or whatever your favorite program is. But notice that when I go into the guides, I can center my object in the screen. Right now it's black. I'm going to copy this object, Control C and Control V. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shrink this object down by all sides. If I can do this properly. And I'm going to make the inner object a different color, like, I don't know, red. And then kind of move this to the middle. There we go. I've got this like red and black objects. And you know what? I'm a vain person. I'm going to put my initials in here, like TT. Right, there we go. It looks like a pie. It looks like a pie. Huh? I know. It's really vain. It looks like a pie, right? Look at that. Pie, right? TT, two T's together, it looks like, the pie. No problem. And you know what? Maybe I can put some other stuff in here. Maybe I want to put some kind of lightning bolt or whatever. We'll do some of that later on, but this is enough. I want to just use this sprite to bring it in. Notice that there's separation. I've got like space, a white space all around the sprite. It's like this big, okay? But I want to bring this in, and I want to save this inside my assets. Well, first of all, let's save it on the desktop. So I'm going to say File, Save As. And by the way, create something, anything to do this, to practice with me, okay? It doesn't matter. Crit is, pretty much as easy as this is. So if I go to Desktop, and if I go to, I'll call this thing, I'll call it a shield. Right, here's my shield. And it's a PNG object that I'm putting on my desktop. I'm saving it. And now, if you notice, if I go to my desktop, I probably have that object somewhere on my screen. Here it is. Here's my shield object. This is my sprite that I want to use, right? And I want to drag this thing into Unity. So the way we had to access Unity is I want to bring Unity over here to the side. Take a look. And here on the right-hand side, I want to make some place to hold this sprite, right? Which means I need a new folder. I'm going to make a new folder in Unity. Right-click, make a new folder. We'll call this, we'll call them textures. That's what these things are. And we'll talk about why they're called textures more next week. But for now, let's just call them textures. We're making a new folder called textures. And inside the textures, I'm going to drag and drop this shield.png into there, like this. Boop. And guess what? It's in. I dragged this thing into Unity, and it's here. And if you want to see it in larger view, you can make it bigger, like this. Look. And there's my shield. Very simple. And guess what? I don't see anything around it. I don't see like a thing around my shield. It looks like it's transparent because it's a PNG image. PNGs have the ability for you to have an alpha channel to add transparencies. JPEGs, that's a different kind of image. We've got to talk about image formats as well in this course. A JPEG has the R, the G, and the B, but not necessarily the A, the alpha channel, right? And if you want to have an alpha channel, a lot of times what we want to use is a PNG type image of that kind of extension. They're very common. They're not the highest quality, so they have a bit of lossiness when it comes to how an image would look. So if I would take a picture, let's say, for example, Leslie was taking a photo. She was doing a photo shoot. There's a photographer that they thought she was the most beautiful girl in the world, and they were taking pictures of her, right? Maybe for her wedding, right? Like just straight up, right? Or let's say you had pictures with your family, and I brought that image in as a PNG, right? I would have loss. There'd be a bit of loss, right? So photographers don't do that. They bring it in as raw, a raw image or a JPEG image or something like this, a bit less lossy or lossless, if you will, right? And when they bring it in, they see all the colors that your camera can capture. Everything is possible with lots of light. PNG, what it does is a compression algorithm that reduces the size of the image and also adds in this transparent channel. So we can layer PNGs one on top of the other. You can do the same thing with in Photoshop with a JPEG object, right? And we're going to talk about using Photoshop and creating layers in Photoshop, because one of the things I want to show you this semester is how I do things like layers, masks, all that kind of stuff in Photoshop or in Krita. Because we need to know how to do those things when we want to create special effects, like an image or some kind of texture. Right now, though, we made a very simple PNG image. It's called my shield. There it is. It's a shield device. It looks like this. Notice I get a preview of the image over here, right? That's what this looks like. in my shield. I also have, the shield actually has two parts to it. One is the outer part and one is the inner part. Here's the outer part. And it says that the texture type is a sprite, 2D and UI. Notice it says that on the right-hand side inside my, in my inspector, okay? And if I take this thing, and if I drag and drop it into my scene, right, just like this, it's there, but it's behind the camera. The camera is being used. If you don't want to ever see the camera, if you want to hide this camera, this is just a depiction of the main camera. What you can do is you can go to Gizmos. There's an area right here. If you click Gizmos, and I can uncheck 3D icons. So on the top there, there's under Gizmos, I can uncheck 3D icons. I can also make them a lot smaller. So I can kind of make the 3D icons smaller, and I prefer that instead of unchecking them. Under here, right on the top under scenes, right? You can check 3D icon, or you can make the 3D icons very small, so I can still see them, but they're really, really small, so they don't impede my view of my objects, right? Okay, so I did that. So there's my shield, and if I scroll in, you can see the details now. I can see that. That's one way of doing it. The other way to scroll in is if I just double click on my shield, it scrolls right in. It actually frames it. And the third way, if I'm way out here somewhere, and if I want to see my shield, if I press F, right, it actually brings me in, the F key, which is frame select. All right, so shield, I'm way out here, F, if I click onto it and press F, boom, I'm right there. I can see it again, okay? So notice this is how big it is. And if I go to my game, that's how small it'll be. But wow, look how skewed this thing is, man. This is like a really skewed view. Why? Because I'm using free aspect. I'm in my game tab here. So I'm in my scene tab, and then I'm in my game tab. Look at the game tab looks different now than my scene tab. Scene tab looks like this. Game tab looks like this for me. Maybe it looks different for you. But if I do one of these, you can see that it'll stretch out normally. And if I do this, it'll scrunch up and try and insert my this object in the free aspect. I could also specify a particular aspect. If I click on this thing, I can say I want it 16 by 9, right? Or if I have a specific game in mind, like for example, a game that's running 1024 by 768, I can do that. There's 1024 by 768, and I can scroll out to see the whole screen, if you will. I can also make my own custom ones. If I go here and I click plus, I want to make one that's 640 by 480. I can do that. So I can say this is, 640 by 480. So I can put that in there, 640, and then 480, right? And then press OK. You can see now that I have 640 by 480, which is an old standard for games. Old, very old. Commodore 64 old, all right? What was that? 640 by 480, right? Yeah. Okay. So you can make whatever aspect you want. So this is a preview of what you're going to see. I'm not sure, actually. Yeah. So now let's take a look at this. If I press the play button, look at the play button in Unity, what it does, it actually plays a preview of your game. This is my game. Yay! Nothing. Doesn't look like anything, right? If your game disappears, if your shield disappears somehow, or you can't see it, then somehow it's outside the range of the camera. A good example of that is this. If I take my shield, this little sprite that I have, right, which is right here, the shield, and if I press the W key or this little button right here, and I move it outside of the camera like this, right? So this is outside of this little square. See it? And if I press, by the way, I did that when I was pressing play. Let's try that again, and I'll talk about that in a second. If I press play again and you go back, then guess what? Then the shield is gone, right? Because it's out here somewhere. Can't see it. The only thing we can see, the player sees, is anything that's inside the view of the camera. Okay, anything outside the view of the camera is not rendered. It's still in the game world. It exists in the game world, but it's not rendered. It's not being drawn. Okay, so very basic stuff that I'm talking about right here, just so you understand how Unity works. Because if you guys never use Unity, right? So this is good. All right, so now the other thing is I can undo those changes. I can Control Z or Z, and I can move my shield back to where it was. So if I Control Z enough times, I can move it back to the middle. Okay, there it is. One thing to note is if I'm playing, I have something called real-time mode, right? So in real-time mode, if I make any changes to the scene, they don't stay. They don't stick. It's only for testing. So if I move my player off the screen, and I go back to game, I can see he's gone. And if I move my player probably half on the screen, and if I go back to game, he's back on the screen. But if I stop playing, this button, if I stop playing, he goes back to the middle, because I'm not really changing anything in play. When I'm in play mode, I'm just experimenting. I can experiment to see what the thing will look like before. It's like a preview. Now, here's the thing to let you guys know. This, what I'm showing you, is not an actual game. It's just a preview. In order for me to make, I don't know where these gnats are coming from. In order for us to make a game, I have to build a game. And you can create a build. Cool. I can create a build. Okay, so a build, the way it works is I can build for a particular platform. So let's talk about builds really quickly, because we're going to need to do that in this semester, okay? So here I have my preview. That's what this is. This is my pause, and I can also step forward every frame, okay? Games, the way they work are every frame, that means every 1/60th of a second, or exactly 16.66 non-terminating repeating milliseconds, 16.66, right? In Unity, at least, it's trying to run at 60 frames per second, right? It's going to keep redrawing, washing your screen out, like basically erasing and redrawing your screen over and over again. Okay, that's what the game engine does for you. So what I can do with a step option is step forward one frame, one frame, one frame, one frame, frame by frame, to see what's going to happen. You know, one thing at a time. When I pause my game, so I can pause my game, I can play my game in preview mode, and then I can step through my game. That's what this thing does. But let's build my game for a second, okay? In order for me to build my game, I need to actually choose a platform. So I'm going to go to File. Do this with me, please. File, Build Settings. And under Build Settings, you can see that I have a deleted scene. Sure. I have no scene. You should see no scenes or a deleted scene. Notice on the right, my scene is called Main. If I click Add Open Scenes, my main scene will be the first thing that plays in my build. Okay, and notice the builds that I have options for. If you downloaded all those options like Leslie did, she went like checked everything, and you'll see all these options here: PC, iOS, tvOS, Android, blah blah. You may only see the ones that you downloaded. Okay, but on the left you can see that if I want to make it for PC, Mac, or Linux, I'm going to click this one. I'm going to make this build PC, Mac, or Linux. On the right hand side, you can choose your target platform: PC, Mac, or Linux. I'm going to leave it at PC for now. The architecture is x86 64-bit, so 64-bit architecture. I can choose other things in here, but all I want to do is click on this Build and Run button. We're going to do this later on because we're going to make a standalone game for ourselves, or standalone application. So Build and Run, it's going to take you to this Assets area again, right, when you click Build and Run. And it's going to ask you, where do you want to save your build? Typically, what I recommend is putting it in the Builds folder. So if you go to New Folder, I'm going to make a new Builds folder. And inside the Builds folder, I'm going to double click to get in there. And I'm going to change I'm going to select this folder. And inside there, that's where my game is going to be built up. Okay. Now, right now, it's going to be called Builds, right? But who cares? We can always erase it. And what's going to happen is Unity is going to try and build up your game. Okay. We didn't give it really a name. We just took the name Builds. And then it's going to run this little window, right? What it's actually done is it's created a little executable, a little exe file for you. And so you can give this game to your friend. Take it in that folder, the whole thing in the PDB file and everything else, and give it to your friend, and they can run it on their computer right now. Right? This little simple game we made, right? Notice that it says it's going to run 1920 by 1080, and it's going to run full screen by default. If I want it windowed, I got to click this little window option here. And if I click play, then we should see Made with Unity, and boom, there's my game. So you put something on the screen. Okay. By the way, doing this with OpenGL or DirectX would probably take us 2 weeks or so to train you how to do it properly, right? I'm just saying, it just does. It just, you know, to make your window, you have to understand your project. You have to start talking about shaders. You have to start talking about how things are working. And by the time you get all that stuff done, I don't know why. Huh?
Probably comes before your leg wallets.
Maybe, I don't know. But then that's how it works, okay? So we made our first build. Yay. We can also build for WebGL. WebGL is really cool to share. In this course, I'm going to get you guys to make things with WebGL, because when you give me your build, I can like literally double click it and it'll run. Like there's no, it'll work. It'll run on my Mac. It'll run on Windows because it's web. right? So it's okay. And it'll look almost exactly the same. But we're not going to do this build right now. So a build, we talked about difference about builds and about preview. Preview, you can't change anything. You can only experiment. Also notice that if I go back to my, my stuff in here, you can see that my shield sprite, if I click here on inside my textures folder on the shield that I made, on the right-hand side, and it's hard for you to see. I'm just going to expand the screen one more time, just so you can see it even clearer, because I want you guys to see these options. Okay, so I'm going to go to, instead of 125, let's just make it 175, so you can really see what I'm talking about. It's going to be pretty ugly, and I do apologize. But hey, there's a reason for all this stuff. Now you see now, really big, right? All right, so if you notice here, my shield, when I click onto it, it has this little down arrow, and on the right, it has the texture type, which is by default Sprite 2D and UI. You can choose other ones. So what the heck are these textures here? What do you think they are? Interestingly enough, it's the way that the texture is being saved in Unity. Unity interprets this PNG image as a texture. The word texture is kind of weird for us. Texture for us means, if you've never been a game developer, it means something you touch, like a texture. I can have a rough texture or a smooth texture, right? But in game development, it really means an image, right? And the texture itself is made up of pixels, right? And you know what a pixel is? What's pixel? Don't tell me a dot on the screen. That's not what it stands for. That's not where pixel came from. It comes from picture, right? That's where the pixel comes from. A picture, right? That's the pix part, right? And each one of those little dots on the screen, those pixels, those little dots, they have a few properties, right? They have a position and a color. Every pixel on the screen, even the ones that are transparent. Pixel, they have a position and a color, right? So picture elements, pixels, that's what they are made up of position and color. And it's just data. Look at this image, this thing I made really stupidly and easily, right? This thing here has many pixels, right? Many picture elements inside, little dots that's all over the place, right? But if you think about it, each little dot has a couple of pieces of data. And if you break it down, it has more than just those. What a color is made up of is several layers of color, right? It has a red channel, it has a blue channel, and it has a green channel. Okay? When you actually draw things in real life, okay? In real life, if I take paint, and this is a lesson for you guys to remember for your test, if we do a multiple choice true-false tests, right? Probably won't. But if I ever was going to ask you about it, if I really take a bucket of paint and I want to paint a mural, and my mural is black, okay? Let's just say my mural is completely black, okay? And I want to paint on it. I take white paint. I dip my paintbrush in paint. Here's my paintbrush. Dip it in paint, and I start drawing on the mural, right? What am I doing? I'm adding a white layer on top of it. That's what I'm doing. Okay, but that's not how digital painting works, right? And what's going to happen is the light is going to hit that white color and reflect back to your eyes. That's how it works in real life. So, and white is made up of all the colors, right? If you think about it, it's like everything on in the digital world. Whereas in the real world, what happens is it reflects the colors that make up that white tone. White and black are not colors. White and black are shades, if you think about that. That's what they are, right? The colors we really reflect are things like red. Red, when the red light is the thing that hits you. So now if I have a paintbrush again in real life and I'm painting red on top of white, I'm adding red to it, right? It's an additive process. I can keep adding stuff and adding stuff and adding stuff. That's not how it works in computer graphics. In fact, if anything, it's subtractive in some ways. Okay? We may argue one way or the other here, but think about this, what I'm doing. If I take a color, that color is made up of 3 channels, red, green, and blue. In combination, they blend. Those 3 colors blend together to give you your final color. That's how it works, right? And then you have your alpha channel that gives you transparency. So each pixel has that property, right? Each pixel has that property. And so the way Unity saves this pixel is or this image is of type texture 2D, right? It says texture or sprite 2D and UI, okay? Here's a sprite mode. I want to talk about sprite mode for a second. Notice it says single. If I had multiple sprites, a big sprite sheet that we're going to handle in Texture Packer, you could have multiple, right? And the other one is, here's the big one, pixels per unit, okay? Remember I talked about my actual object is 100 pixels by 100 pixels, but it's really small, man. Look how small it is, 100 by 100. Yeah, because guess what? I made it 100 by 100 because I knew that it's going to be converted down to 1 unit. This is not pixel perfect graphics. This is a conversion of what we put in here to something else that works with Unity. If I wanted this to be pixel perfect, I would change this to what number? What number would I change? If I want this to be pixel perfect, the thing I made, what number would I change this to? What do you think? Right now it's 100 pixels per unit. If I want to make this pixel perfect, what do I want to change this to?
That resolution.
The what?
That resolution that you've given at the first time.
Which is? Well, not really. It's this. If you look at pixels per unit, if I change this to 1, now I have 1 pixel per unit. Now 1 pixel per unit is going to be massive. That means like it's going to be 100 units. 100 units, 1 pixel, 1 unit. 1 pixel, 1 meter. Right? That's what this will mean. This means 100 pixels, 1 unit. I put 50. That means 1 unit, 50 pixels in 1 unit. It's twice as big right now, right? So if I put 2, that's going to be like crazy amounts. 50 would be 2 unit, 1 pixel for every, 50 pixels for every unit, which means it would be 2 units tall.
Yeah.
Right, that's what it means, right? Okay, let's show you this. So let's go to 50 for a second. So if I want to keep that, also notice down here, what I have is I have this thing called maximum size and then compression. If I want to make it per pixel perfect, I don't want any compression. Compression actually adds anti-aliasing, which means it adds extra pixels. We'll talk about anti-aliasing next week a little bit. I'm going to click none, right? And then I'm going to click apply. And you're going to see that this thing is going to change size twice as big as it was before. Let's make it original size. Now, this is going to be the original size. It's going to be pixel perfect. It's going to be 100 times larger than what we saw. It's going to fill this. It's going to fill the screen basically. So 1, right? But this is the original unit. All right. And if I go down here and I click apply, you're going to see now that it's massive. And if I scroll out, you can see that the shield is actually way bigger than our screen. And if I go to game, you can see that that's all I see in the game. So this is an important distinction because people don't know this. They just accept drag and drop stuff on the screen. They ran with it and they don't know what it means. But pixel perfect is something that we probably will not run with in Unity. We'll convert it to some unit measure that makes sense with Unity. And the other thing is if you want to run pixel perfect, your physics will be way off. When you use physics in Unity right now, if all my objects are this big, and if I was to shrink this object down, so again, example, right now my shield in scale right now is 1 to 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. If I shrink my shield down, it'll mess up my physics large. Because what happens is it'll take that scale. So I can actually scale this back down. I can actually physically scale the shield. So I can go down to here. Here's my scale. And I can scale with these little units here. If I click the middle one, it'll scale both sides the same. So I can kind of click everything the same proportionally. If I only click one of them, it'll skew this thing to make it shorter, or this way down here to make it shorter or narrower, I meant. So this is narrow, and this is short, right? So I can do that. This is using the scale option, right? And if I want to go back, I can always reset everything. I can go back to here and reset, and boom, it's all back to what it was, right? So I can do that numerically over here by going, okay, I want this thing to be 0.8 on the x-axis and 0.8 on the y-axis, so it's 80% of the size. Or I can do it by eye. And you can see how the numbers change automatically on the right. I can also drag. If I kind of go next to the actual value and I go on top of the x, I can actually drag the value up here like this, right? So there's all kinds of options. And then again, I can reset it back to normal. All right, so this is the shield. So this is the texture. And this shield here There's two shields. There's one in the textures and one in the hierarchy. The one that's in the texture is actually the actual shield itself that I've imported into Unity. The one here, because I dragged it from here to here, let's just delete this one for a second. If I delete this one, there's a shield that's in my textures, but it's not actually in my scene. Does the shield, will the shield appear in my game? Nope. The only thing that's going to appear in my game at runtime is anything that's in my hierarchy. If it's not in my hierarchy, never going to appear. Okay? So the shield, even though it's here, is in my part of my assets in my textures folder. It hasn't been added to my scene. And there's two ways I can do that, like I showed you. One is dragging and dropping, right? I'm going to do that. Or I can make my shield appear by my hand. If I drag and drop, look what I get when I get that. I get a transform and a sprite renderer. So I can do that in piecemeal. I can do the same thing. I can just delete this. Oops. I can delete this. And then I can add an empty object. Let's add an empty object, create empty. We'll call this player as an example, or whatever I want. And now you can see that the player object, let's reset it so it's back to normal. So I can do two things. I can reset like this, or I can change its position to 0, 0, 0. So I can change its position by manually to 0, 0, 0, and then it'll put it right in the middle of the screen again. Okay. So right now the player is empty. There's no component, but I want a sprite renderer. I can click Add Component, and I can search for Sprite Renderer. There's my Sprite Renderer component. I can do that too. And now notice that there's still nothing being shown because you know what? There's no sprite that's pointing to it. Right? My sprite under the sprite property is empty. It says none. If I want my sprite to appear, I can just drag and drop from my textures all the way into my component and bang, it appears again. So I've just dragged and dropped from here to here. So why am I showing you all this stuff? Because this is what we're going to be doing this semester. I'm going to be talking nitty gritty how to make things appear on the screen, right? And how to make, you know, user interfaces, kind of build a user interface from scratch, right? And I wanted you guys to get a chance to know the UI, the user interface for Unity itself. Okay? Questions so far about Unity, because this is the tool we're going to be using for the rest of the semester. Okay. I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot. And if you never used Unity before, you're going to be like, holy, wow, it's like so much stuff you can do. And by the way, guys, we're still only scratching the surface, right? Oh yeah, we haven't done any scripting at all, right? We didn't do anything like that, right? And we don't have a scene that we're going from one scene to the other, right? Okay, one more thing before we go. Let's add a button. Let's add a button and a main menu that takes us to this scene. This is our main scene, right? And we're going to make a button, click the button, and move us to this scene, okay? And then we'll stop. I know we're running over time, but give me a second, okay? The other people can wait for a second. All right, so first of all, we have our shield, which is not pixel perfect, but not quite the default size that it was, okay? And I want to add another scene. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to go into my scenes folder in here, right-click, and I'm going to add, create a new scene on the left, see? And I'm going to call this scene menu, my menu scene. If you double-click the menu scene, the shield will appear to disappear. But the reason why it does that is because it doesn't exist. There's nothing in the hierarchy anymore. Okay, I want to make a button. And in the hierarchy, in my main menu, I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to add in, go down to UI, and add in a button. So if you look at the button, this is the choice I made. So I've gone in, right-clicked, I checked UI, and went to button. And the button, when I click button, it has three components, three things on the hierarchy. A canvas, a button, and an event system. We'll talk about these in a second. Take a look at this. So this is my main menu. This is my main scene. This thing down here, this thing. This is my scene, right? But somehow on the scene, there's a button that appears. What the heck? Where did this go? How is this my scene, but I don't see a button in here? Look, here's my main camera. It's right here, right? How come I don't see a button here, but when I go to my game, it's like here? Because what Unity does by default is it creates something called a canvas that's very large, like right over here, like this. How you doing? Almost finished. So here's my button. This is what my button looks like. So I've got a canvas that I can play with from my user interface perspective, but my scene is way down in here, which can't be seen, right? So my button, here's my button. If I take it and if I click this little gizmo over here and I move it somewhere, like for example, I want to move this button to the top left by hand. There we go. Here's my button. It says button. And if I say, let's change my button. So right now I have a canvas, and this button is called button. And inside my button, I have a text value. And I want to change my text value to say, click me. So I'm going to go click me, click me. And I did that inside the button. Inside the button, which is white right now, I went in there and I checked click me. Now, if you go back to the scene, it's going to look like this. Click me. So here's the scene. But notice that this is not the scene. This is the canvas. If I want to see the camera, it's like here, right? And the canvas is here, right? So kind of different. So canvas, camera, canvas, camera. And if you look at the button's in the canvas. Here's the button in the canvas, right? If I double click on the button. In that text object that's inside the button, scroll down where it says text on a script and change it to whatever you want. See it? All right, so I got my button, but I need script to make myself move from one place to the other, right? I want to move from this scene to the next scene. And the way to do this is two things. One, inside the file build settings, I want to add open scenes, where it says add open scenes. You can see now that I have two scenes. I have a main scene and a menu scene. And I want you to drag the menu scene above the main scene like this. I have my menu scene first and then my main scene. Menu scene, main scene. All right, cool. That's the first thing I want you to do. Okay, now that I got that, what I want to do is add a little bit of script inside the scripts folder. I want to add a new script by right-clicking and going create C# script. So everything done in Unity is C# by default. You guys taken C# before? No, no. You never did any programming at all?
I did Java.
All right, we're gonna have lots of fun this course. Okay, so in the C# script, we're gonna call this the button script. All right, we're gonna call it the button. Just change the name to button by clicking once and clicking again.
This is COMP253.
Yeah, come on in. I'm running a little bit late. I'm gonna be teaching it too, so just wait. Another 4 minutes for that. All right, so here's my button script. Here's my button script. And my button script right now, if I double click onto it, it's going to drag open my default editor. For you, it might be monodevelop. All right. Now, again, this is not a scripting course, but I want you to notice a couple of things. There's a couple of functions. Now, this should be familiar to you if you've ever done Java or any other language, right? There's two functions that trigger every single time. The start function triggers at the beginning of when the scene starts if this script is attached to any game object. And the update function triggers every update, every frame. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to make another script, another little function, which I'm going to make public. Okay? And I'm going to call this function, it's going to return void. It's going to be called the click me button script. So click me. Oh. Okay, so this click me button script right here, or this little function, is what's going to make me, when I click the button, it's going to move me to the next scene. In order for me to make that happen, I have a bunch of, by the way, if you don't remember this, remember I'm recording it. So you can always go back and look at this. I have a bunch of libraries that I'm using. I'm going to use one more library. I'm going to go to using, type in using, Unity Engine. And I believe I have to use scene management.
That's the new.
Okay, so scene manager, what it does is it allows me to switch from one scene to the other. Don't worry if you don't remember, and if you don't have to even follow along yet. Right? You've got most of it right now. What I wanted to give you. Okay. What I want to do here is in my click me button, I want to say that scene manager, my scene manager, dot load scene. And I want to specify the scene in quotations which I want to load, which is going to be the main scene. Well, we're going to do this again, guys. This is not the last time we're going to see it, okay? So I'm going to load this main scene when I click the button. That's what I wanted to do. Okay? Pretty simple. All right, so again, all I've done is I've added this part right here using Unity Engine Scene Management on line 4. And on the bottom, inside of a new function that I defined, which is called click me button, I've used scene manager.load scene main. Okay. And so when I click the button, it's going to go to the next scene. Okay. Okay, that's good. But guess what? It's still not going to work because it's not connected to anything. This button script is not connected to a darn thing. I need to connect it to something. I'm going to put it on the canvas. So on the canvas item itself, whenever I want to add a script, I'm just going to minimize these things, or minify it for now. I can actually drag and drop the button onto the canvas like this. Now the button is physically here on the canvas. And I'm going to save scene. The button itself is funny. It has a basic shape for the button, which we're going to fool around with this semester, right? And if you scroll down, it has this on-click event, right here. If I click the plus button, I'm in the button right now. If I click the plus button here, I can set off the click event. And inside this area here, I can specify the C# script button on the left. Or you can also drag and drop. You can also drag and drop the script from here to there. When I do this on the right, where it says no function, right, I can change this, right, to any of the functions that make sense. So instead of runtime, so the button script is what I want to use, right? And in order for it to run this button script here, by the way, if I go back to the button script, two things. It's got to save. Sometimes what's also required is the button itself. We have to build, sometimes we have to build the actual scene, typically not. Okay, there's the button, there's the canvas. And the button itself, so canvas is where the button script is. Button is the actual object that we put in the scene. And then in this area here, we have the on-click function, this on-click function, where we have the button script attached, which we just chose. Let's make this way. There's the button script, right? Then what should happen is you should see this monoscript with a string name of what the button is called, which is, for example, the name of the button, which is, I think, click button or something like that. What did I call it? I called it click me button. Click me button. Click me button. Now it should appear. It should appear there anyway. It should appear in here. Yep.
I just want to mention a little thing you're saying again.
Tell me.
I actually got an error because C wasn't capitalized.
This one?
Yeah, because it's a method.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, but they're getting started.
Shouldn't matter. That's what I'm saying. It shouldn't matter at all.
I know it might be because I'm using the Mac version. So like, it was weird because it wouldn't let me do anything until
It's possible. It's possible. That's the problem, right? So canvas, inside the canvas. Guys, for people who are coming in right now for COMP253 come on in. We have a lot of stuff to talk about, and we'll be going through things together. But you can see that the click me button script is the one I want to change, and I'm not seeing that in monoscript. And one of the reasons why I may not be seeing that is a couple of things. One, where the button script has been added, right? So right now the button script is added in the canvas, and sometimes what we need to do is add the button script somewhere else, like in an empty object. Like, so if I create an empty called game controller, let's call this game controller, and I pull this out to the root, okay, as an example, and I can, instead of putting the button in my canvas element right here, I can just delete this object, remove the component. And if I take this game controller and add the button script right here, there's my button script. Okay, this button script is the one that I'll be, clicking. And also, again, to make it available, you have to do two things. One is that this has to be public. Now, you could use on, like what you're saying. If you really want to make it like convention-wise, I could change this to like, on click me button.
I meant because it gave me.
It doesn't really matter. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter at all. But just in case you're worried, you can always do that. And then in the button itself, so the button object, when I go down here, I can delete this thing. So let's just delete and add a new one. And then I should be able to choose the button class. And I believe, no, it's still not working. You're going to get a script name. But that's how normally it works. You choose the script name, and next week we'll show you how to move from one scene to the other. Once you move it, it'll just send you from one scene to the next. And I just kicked out the the HDMI cord again. Isn't that awesome?
It's gonna be something also next.
I know, it's just stupid HDMI cord. Okay, questions around Unity and what it looks like and stuff. There's a lot to learn, like tons of learn. If you've never done Unity before, then we're going to learn a whole bunch about Unity, about making stuff in Unity, outside of Unity, all that kind of thing. There's a lot of things to learn. If you've done Unity before, today would have been a bit of a review and maybe a little bit boring in some ways, but it's good because there's always things to learn from Unity developers. When one Unity developer does something compared to another one, you see some different things. Like I might do things a lot different than Wallace, right?
Oh yeah, I know. Well, sorry, it's because I think it's because of the Mac thing. It was saying, "Oh, error, wrong naming convention," and blah blah blah.
Yeah, so. It could be, but I don't know.
That wasn't why it was giving us this issue. It was just that's why my computer was.
Okay.
Are we using Visual Studio Code for?
I'm using Visual Studio Code, but you can use Visual Studio. You're probably either Visual Studio or Mono Develop.
Well, I meant
by default.
The next class.
The next class we're using Visual Studio Code. All right, guys, that's it for me for today. Next week we're gonna get down and dirty with real development and creation. So be prepared for next week. Please bring your tablets in, have Unity installed, and that's the for sure those two things you need, and Krita. Those three things you need for next week. Okay. Otherwise, that's it for me.